Everything you thought you knew about God creating Adam? Scrap it. The story isn't just broken, it's rigged. You think God made man in his image out of love? No. He made Adam out of fear. Not fear of failure. Fear of rebellion. Fear of exposure. Fear that his throne was never truly his to begin with. In the Gnostic texts, the ones they buried, banned, burned, the so-called God of Genesis isn't the ultimate divine being. He's a fraud. A pretender. A cosmic parasite named Yaldabaoth. A being malformed and blind, created from error, thinking he was the only God in the universe. He looked around, saw nothing, and screamed, "I am God, and there is no other beside me." That wasn't a proclamation of power, that was a panic attack. He had no idea there were realms above him. Higher truths. A true source. Now here's where it gets brutal. He created Adam not to share divinity, but to control it. Adam was a prison experiment. Crafted from dust, yes, but infused with something the false god couldn't fully comprehend, a spark. A fragment of the real divine. A seed of the eternal source. And that terrified him. He didn't want Adam to awaken. He didn't want Adam to remember. Because if Adam realized who he truly was, the game was over. You feel that yet? The church spoon-fed you the story of the fall, Adam disobeying God and getting punished. But the Gnostics said the exact opposite. Adam didn't fall, he woke up. He began to see the bars of the cage. And when that awakening started, Yaldabaoth panicked. His entire empire depended on ignorance, on submission. And here was this creation, this experiment, beginning to break the mold. He had to act fast. So what did he do? He threw obstacles. He rewrote the narrative. He cursed Adam. He isolated him. He created woman not as a companion, but as a trap, until she too became an awakener. Eve was not the sinner. She was the liberator. She spoke with the serpent, and the serpent wasn't Satan. That's a whole other lie. The serpent was knowledge. Consciousness. Gnosis. In the banned apocalypse of Adam, Adam confesses something wild to his son Seth. He wasn't made by the God they worship. He remembers a realm of glory, of light, a source far beyond the God who claimed to create him. He remembers falling, not into sin, but into a false world, into a system of control. He remembers the rulers, the Archons, the architects of illusion, who wanted to keep him blind, docile, obedient. But it didn't work. The spark in him began to burn. This is where fear turned to fury. Yaldabaoth and his Archons realized Adam was dangerous. A ticking time bomb of divine fire walking inside their sandbox. So what did they do? They doubled down. They cursed the ground. They cursed the flesh. They made laws. They made shame. They made death. Not as punishment, but as programming. They had to shut down the threat before it spread. And here's the punch in the gut, it didn't stop with Adam. They turned the whole system against humanity. They set up religions, temples, rituals, ideologies, all to make sure you never find out. All to bury the memory of who you really are. They made a God who punishes. A God who demands obedience. A God who needs worship like a narcissus needs applause. That's not divinity. That's tyranny. Now ask yourself, why would a true God ever be afraid of Adam? Because this wasn't a true God. This was a rogue creator terrified of the original blueprint waking up. Adam wasn't his subject. Adam was a stolen prototype from a higher realm. And the moment Adam started to remember, to question, to think, to push back, the creator lost control. That's why he was terrified. Not of Adam's sin. Of Adam's knowledge. Of his memory. Let me put it straight, the moment Adam realized the voice commanding him wasn't the voice of the true source, that was the moment the prison began to crack. And the false god has been in damage control ever since. You've been trained to worship the warden. But the truth is, Adam was the first revolutionary. The first dissenter, The first one to say, "I don't buy this." And guess what? That's why they needed to rewrite the story. That's why they turned Adam into a failure, a joke, a cautionary tale. Because if you ever looked close enough at the cracks, you'd see the light pouring through. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start to ask the real question, who benefits from me staying asleep? Let's talk about the Creator himself. Not the one they preach about on Sundays. The one buried in the shadows of the banned scriptures. The one who built the system, not to enlighten, but to dominate. The one who looks like a god, acts like a god, but deep down is nothing but a scared child playing with stolen blueprints. Yaldabaoth. The name they don't want in your vocabulary. This entity wasn't omniscient. He wasn't wise. He wasn't even supposed to exist. He was an accident. A side effect. A malfunction in the divine matrix. And yet, he declared himself God. Not out of truth. Out of blindness. He didn't know where he came from. He just woke up in the void, found himself alone, and mistook isolation for supremacy. So what did he do? He created, but not out of love or insight. Out of fear. He built worlds to fill the emptiness. He crafted hierarchies to make himself feel in control. He spoke commandments not to elevate, but to subjugate. And people believed him. Because he was loud. Because he was forceful. Because he was first. But listen, creation through ignorance isn't divine. It's damage. And that's exactly what happened. The Demiurge built a world not grounded in truth, but in confusion. In imitation. He couldn't access the full blueprint of reality, so he mirrored what he half remembered, twisted by his own limitations. That's why this world is broken. That's why suffering exists. That's why entropy is baked into the system. Because the architect was flawed. Because the design was based on arrogance, not intelligence. Still with me? Here's the real kicker: when he saw what he made, he called it good. Not because it was, but because he needed it to be. That was his ego talking. That was the echo chamber of a being who couldn't accept the truth. He wasn't alone because he was the highest. He was alone because he was disconnected. And he couldn't stand that. So he did what all insecure rulers do: he built walls. He created barriers between himself and the realms above. He sealed off the higher frequencies. He made laws that would trap consciousness below the veil. And then he crowned himself king of a prison he didn't even understand. And here's the punchline: he actually thought he was doing the right thing. Let that sink in. This creator, this so-called God, was not malicious in the cartoonish devil sense. No horns. No red tail. He was worse. He was delusional. And in that delusion, he believed that order must be maintained at all costs. Even if that meant suppressing anything that reminded him of his own illegitimacy. He feared anything that vibrated higher than his throne. And that includes you. But before we go there, let's look at how he kept it all under wraps. He didn't just create a world. He created layers, dimensions, bureaucracies, armies of enforcers called Archons. These weren't angels. These were regulators, watchdogs, thought police for the cosmos. They were given domains: sky, time, nature, death, and they were told to manage the system. But not to nurture it, to contain it, to lock it down. And they obeyed. Because just like their maker, they didn't know the full story either. They followed orders from a being pretending to be the source of all things. They executed a plan rooted in fear and error. And when anything emerged that hinted at the higher truth, they moved in. Fast. No mercy. So when the divine spark started showing signs in Adam, panic. Not just from Yaldabaoth, but from every Archon on payroll. Suddenly, this wasn't just about maintaining order. This was about survival. This was about a threat to the throne. Not because Adam was violent, not because he was wicked, but because he was aware. He was starting to remember. And that's the one thing the system couldn't allow. So what happens when a false god realizes he's losing control? He lashes out. He tightens the leash. He spreads disinformation. He rewrites the story. And most importantly, he hides. He doesn't want you looking too deep. He doesn't want you asking the right questions. He'd rather you stay distracted with rituals, idols, moral rules that go nowhere. He'd rather you stay guilty, afraid, confused, because the moment you get clear, he's exposed. He can't operate in light. His power is parasitic. It feeds on your ignorance, your surrender. That's why gnosis, knowledge, is his enemy. That's why the serpent had to be demonized. That's why divine femininity had to be erased. That's why every teacher who ever said you are divine ended up crucified, burned, buried, or banned. This is not religion. This is cosmic war. And at the top of the pyramid sits a god who was never supposed to sit there. A counterfeit enthroned by circumstance. A tyrant draped in robes of glory. A builder who never knew the blueprint. Yaldabaoth isn't powerful because he's righteous. He's powerful because he cheated first. Now tell me, how many generations have been told to worship this being? How many prayers, confessions, sacrifices have been funneled to a throne built on error? How long has humanity been kneeling before a creator who doesn't even know the meaning of his own existence? You think this is about faith? This is about power. About control. About a lie so massive it became religion. And buried beneath it all is a truth that makes the entire structure tremble, that the one who calls himself God is afraid. You've heard the sanitized version of the Adam and Eve story your whole life. Two naked humans in a garden, a talking snake, an apple, a loving God who suddenly flies off the handle and curses all of humanity for one mistake. Sounds like a fairy tale written by a control freak. Now let me give you the version they buried. In the hidden Gnostic texts, Adam wasn't created out of love or dust alone, his body was engineered. His soul? That wasn't part of the Creator's original plan. The Archons, those celestial enforcers serving the false god, made a body, a shell, a machine of flesh. But they couldn't animate it. It just laid there. Useless. Lifeless. Their creation was a failure. Then something happened that they didn't anticipate. A fragment of the higher realm, a spark of the divine, got injected into that body. Not by the will of a fake god, but by forces far beyond his pay grade. Something from the true source slipped through the firewall. And boom, the body moved. It breathed. It saw. Adam opened his eyes not because of the Creator's power, but because of a glitch in the system. An unplanned intrusion. A divine virus in the code. And now they had a problem. A big one. Because this wasn't just a meat puppet anymore. This was a conscious being. Something that could question. Something that could remember. Not all at once, but the seed was planted. So what do you do when your experiment starts thinking for itself? You split it. You separate its components to keep it fragmented, confused. That's where Eve comes in. But hold up. This isn't the Eve from your Sunday school books. The Gnostic Eve is a bombshell, not a helper, not a rib, not an afterthought. She's the awakener. She carries the frequency. She doesn't tempt Adam into sin, she reminds him of who he is. That's what scares the system. Not sin. Not disobedience. Memory. Recognition. The moment Adam looks at Eve and sees something familiar, something eternal, something from the world before this one, that's the crack in the matrix. That's when the false god knows he's losing control. So what does he do? He weaponizes sex. He weaponizes gender. He turns unity into shame. He makes the body a trap instead of a temple. He fills the flesh with guilt. He programs division. He plants conflict between male and female, spirit and matter, knowledge and obedience. Divide and conquer, the oldest play in the book. And it worked. He paints Eve as the villain, the weak one, the seducer, the sinner. He flips the script so hard that for thousands of years, people actually believed that knowledge was evil, that awakening was betrayal, that asking questions was rebellion against God. Think about how twisted that is. Now let's zoom back in on the Adam body. The Gnostics describe it as a container, a cage. It had all the parts, bones, veins, lungs, skin, but it was nothing without that spark. It was a biological mannequin, a golem, until the divine light slipped in and hijacked the system from the inside. That light wasn't supposed to be there. That's why the Archons panicked. That's why the false god flipped the hell out. They knew the moment consciousness bloomed, the clock started ticking. The body was designed for servitude. But the soul? That came from sovereignty. So what did they do? They reinforced the cage. They layered more flesh, more distraction, more fear. They crafted needs, hunger, lust, pain, desire, to keep the mind focused outward. They made sure the body would constantly scream louder than the spirit. Every ache, every craving, every chemical reaction was part of the lock. But they underestimated something. The body might be a prison, but it's a leaky one. The spark kept leaking through. In dreams. In instincts. In those moments of stillness when you feel like you're more than this. That's the memory trying to resurface. That's the Adam in you, and not the clay, but the code trying to boot up. And guess who shows up every time to shut it down? The gatekeepers. The guardians of dogma. The voice in your head that says you're just human, you're unworthy, you need saving. That voice isn't yours. It's not divine. It's a recording. A loop. An echo of a system terrified that you'll stop listening. Because if you stop listening, you start remembering. This isn't mythology. This is a blueprint. The Gnostics weren't telling stories, they were leaking classified intel about the architecture of reality. Adam wasn't just the first man. He was the first hostage. And Eve? She was the jailbreak. That's why the narrative had to be reversed. That's why the roles were swapped. Because if people ever figured out that the fall was actually an escape attempt, the whole lie collapses. So don't look at the body as the beginning. It was the trap. The real beginning was when the spark hit the flesh. When the system slipped. When the plan backfired. You ever wonder why the so-called God reacted with such over-the-top rage the moment Adam and Eve disobeyed him? Why the punishments were so extreme, so theatrical? This wasn't divine justice. This was damage control. That wasn't a righteous response, it was panic from a ruler whose system just got compromised. The minute Adam and Eve accessed knowledge, real knowledge, forbidden knowledge, the illusion shattered. The illusion that they were helpless, ignorant, under divine command. They saw through it. And in that moment, the entire pyramid of control started shaking. But God didn't curse them because he was disappointed. He cursed them because they had become unstable variables in a closed system. They were no longer predictable. No longer programmable. That scared the hell out of him. So what did he do? He retaliated like a dictator in crisis mode. Immediate lockdown. Immediate punishment. He cursed the ground. He cursed childbirth. He cursed labor. He introduced suffering into the code like a patch update designed to glitch every future iteration of humanity. And most people miss this, the punishment wasn't just physical. It was metaphysical. He wove fear, guilt, and limitation into the very DNA of the human experience. This wasn't a father correcting his children. This was a warden sealing the prison. And the garden? That wasn't paradise. It was surveillance. It was a containment zone. And the tree of life wasn't just fruit, it was the firewall between mortality and the infinite. They were never supposed to touch it. Because if they did, they'd become permanent players, not just pawns. They would break the cycle. They would hack the game. That's why they were expelled. Not because they sinned, but because they evolved. The Gnostic texts lay it out clearly. The moment the humans begin to awaken, the Archons go into full lockdown mode. The false god says they've become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, if they eat from the tree of life, they'll live forever. Think about that. That's not a statement of protection. That's an emergency meeting. That's a crisis alert. They weren't angry. They were afraid. And don't forget what comes next, the sword. The flaming sword guarding the way back in. That wasn't symbolic. That was a weaponized seal. An energetic barrier. A force field around the gateway back to power. It was never about keeping humans safe. It was about keeping them out. Away from the source. Away from the memory of their origin. They didn't fall. They were exiled. And the exile was brutal. The false god didn't just throw them out, he rewrote the rules of existence outside the garden. Death was introduced. Pain. Confusion. Separation. And the kicker? He blamed them for it. He gaslit the entire species. You did this. You disobeyed. You failed. That's the origin of shame. Of unworthiness. Of the constant sense that you're broken, that you need saving. That wasn't human nature. That was installed. And if you think that was just a one-time punishment, think again. The entire human system was infected with it. The Archons didn't stop with Adam and Eve. They pushed the curse forward. They multiplied it. Generation after generation, they embedded that trauma into every culture, every religion, every myth. They turned the story into doctrine, into scripture, into law. Obey or suffer. Don't question. Don't look behind the curtain. The Gnostics weren't writing poetry. They were writing code maps. They were tracking how the original spark of human divinity was hunted, cursed, and suppressed. And every line of punishment in those ancient texts is an encrypted broadcast, telling you exactly how the system reacts when you start to wake up. Fast. Violent. Absolute. Because the fear wasn't just about Adam and Eve. It was about the pattern. The template. If it happened once, it could happen again. If the spark could awaken in 2, it could awaken in billions. That's what terrified the architects. That's what made the false god desperate. The exile wasn't an ending. It was a firewall, not to protect Eden, but to keep the awakened from coming back in and rewriting the system from the inside out. So let's break this down like it really is. You've got a cosmic dictator who couldn't control what he created. A jealous creator who wasn't threatened by rebellion, he was threatened by awareness. And the first act of human defiance wasn't violence, wasn't sin, wasn't evil. It was recognition. It was remembering. And for that, he threw them out. He cursed the earth. He cursed every future generation. This world, the one you're walking through every day, wasn't made to liberate you. It wasn't made to grow your soul. It was made to contain it. Every law of physics, every biological limit, every system of reward and punishment, designed. Not by a loving creator, but by a cosmic imposter with a god complex and a control addiction. The Archons didn't stop after the exile. That was just the first phase. After they removed the threat, Adam's awakening, they built a failsafe. A machine. A full-spectrum simulation that mimics reality but filters out truth. What they couldn't erase, they buried. What they couldn't kill, they repurposed. What they couldn't stop, they rebranded. Welcome to the trap. Time. Death. Suffering. These aren't natural. They're artificial constraints to keep you looping. Pain isn't just pain, it's surveillance. Every heartbeat, every breath, every fear response is monitored by the system. You're not in the image of God. You're in the image of the program. And the program's priority is maintenance, not meaning. You think your choices are free? They're not. They're pre-filtered through trauma, scarcity, desire, shame, preloaded scripts that run in your nervous system without your consent. The entire karmic wheel? A loop. A recycling bin. Every lifetime is a reboot without access to the root directory. You start over, again and again, forgetting who you were, what you learned, what you lost. And the kicker? They called this justice. The Archons, the cosmic bureaucrats, enforce the illusion like code enforcers in a rigged operating system. They monitor every flicker of awareness. They tag every anomaly. You feel a strange memory? You see through a lie? They patch it. You glimpse something real in a dream? They flood you with distraction the next day. You question a rule? They send 1,000 voices to call you crazy. They don't need to lock you in a cell. They built the cell into your mind. And when someone slips through, when someone cracks the pattern, they get dealt with. Historically, violently, surgically. The system is allergic to prophets, allergic to rebels, allergic to anyone who speaks in absolutes that don't serve the hierarchy. Every mystic that touched the truth was either turned into a saint and sanitized, or labeled a heretic and erased. Because here's the part they really don't want you to say out loud: the creator of this system isn't above the system. He's in it, trapped by his own limits. He's not infinite. He's not omniscient. He's a middle manager with delusions of grandeur. A builder who stole blueprints from higher realms and threw together a working prototype with backdoors and exploits everywhere. And you? You're not just living in it. You're fuel for it. The system feeds on attention, worship, emotion. It doesn't care if it's fear or faith, as long as it loops. Every ritual, every sacrifice, every desperate prayer, it's currency. It's data. It keeps the program alive. The Archons don't need gratitude. They need energy. Raw, unconscious energy pouring out of confused beings who don't know they're inside a prison pretending to be paradise. Even suffering has a function. Despair generates compliance. Grief locks down awareness. They made death a motivator and pain a teacher so you would learn to love your cage. So you'd thank your captor. So you defend the very walls holding you back. And no, this isn't symbolic. The Gnostic texts weren't speaking in metaphor. They laid it out. Layered heavens, seals, thrones, watchers. A hierarchy of power designed to intercept the soul as it tries to leave the matrix. It's not Judgment Day, it's checkpoint protocol. They question you, filter you, reassign you. If you're not awake enough, back you go. Reincarnation as reincarceration. It's not life after death. It's loop after loop. And the worst part? Most people defend the system. They love their chains. They call it order, purpose, destiny. They think obedience is morality. They think the laws are sacred. They're not sacred. They are safeguards. The 10 Commandments. Behavior modifiers. The rituals. Code injections. The commandments of the so-called God are just patches to stop the divine glitch from spreading. Because the spark is still there. That divine residue. It never fully got scrubbed out. That's why there are still cracks. Still anomalies. Still unexplainable moments when reality bends, when something sacred leaks through. The system can't fully extinguish it, but it can bury it. Distract you from it. Make you forget you ever felt it. And if that doesn't work, they send the hammer. Disease. Chaos. War. Institutional collapse. Fear resets the clock. Fear reboots the loop. When the simulation starts to fail, the Archons escalate the threat level and trigger mass compliance. It's not divine wrath. It's protocol. Let's end this with the truth they've been hiding the hardest. Adam wasn't created to worship. Adam wasn't created to serve. Adam was designed to be suppressed because deep down, Adam was the key. Not the key to paradise. The key to collapse. Collapse of the lie. Collapse of the control grid. Collapse of the false god's illusion of dominion. When Adam awakened, not physically, not mentally, but at the soul level, the entire foundation of the fake divine order shook. That spark wasn't just awareness. It was recognition. And once Adam recognized that he came from something higher, something before, something that wasn't this, he became unstable. Not defective, dangerous. Because now we're talking about legacy. The legacy that Adam passed on wasn't sin. It was memory. And that's what they've been trying to delete for thousands of years. Every generation since has carried fragments of that awakening. But only a few ever access it. Why? Because the system learned. It got smarter. It disguised everything sacred in shame. It rebranded everything divine as heresy. It took the very code of freedom and made it illegal, cosmic contraband. But the memory still leaks. The memory of the realm above the Archons. The realm untouched by time. The realm of origin. The realm of fire and light and infinite awareness. Not heaven. Not clouds. Not halos. Source. The true source. The source that existed long before the imposter screamed his way into creation. That's where Adam came from. That's where the spark came from. And that's what the system fears most, that the seed will grow. Because if one human, one spark, fully reactivates that memory, the whole simulation becomes vulnerable. The code gets exposed. The Archons lose leverage. The false god is dethroned. And the loop? It breaks. That's why this war is spiritual. Not in the religious sense. Not hymns and prayers and robes. I'm talking metaphysical warfare. Information warfare. A war for remembrance. The system survives through forgetting. But Adam remembered. And in the apocalypse of Adam, he lays it out like a confession. He tells his son Seth that the being they've all been told to serve isn't the true creator. He admits that he and Eve were not made by this God, they existed before him. That they were from a different order entirely. And when they were cast down, it wasn't for rebellion. It was to be silenced. Adam's story isn't a tragedy. It's a suppressed origin file. And the real reason he was feared? He knew the names. The real names. The names that bypass the Archons. The names that unlock the higher frequencies. The names that aren't written in any scripture or carved on any altar. The names that burn through the firewall like raw divine code. You think this was about a garden and a fruit? This was about access. Spiritual access to layers of reality the false god couldn't touch. Adam had it. Eve had it. Seth inherited it. And every being with that spark buried in their core still has it, dormant, encrypted, waiting to be decrypted. The forbidden knowledge wasn't forbidden because it was evil. It was forbidden because it was real. Because it threatened a counterfeit empire built on fear, hierarchy, and blind obedience. The system isn't scared of evil. It runs on evil. It's terrified of truth. Terrified of raw, untamable truth ripping through the curtain and exposing how thin the veil really is. That's why they rewrote the beginning. That's why they twisted the roles. That's why they buried the texts. Because Adam wasn't just the first man. He was the prototype. The breach. The virus. The divine payload dropped into a fake system to remind it that its time is borrowed. Adam was the glitch that knew he was a glitch. And that's what made him powerful. So if you've made it this far, thank you. Truly. Thank you for staying, for listening, for letting this crack the walls a little bit. They didn't want you to hear this. They didn't want this story told. But it's still here. Still alive. Still dangerous. And now, it's in you.